But now I do want to start with the breaking news, right? Because it is important. Now, whether or not you think it's the most important story of the day, it's totally up to you, your call. We no longer have Woj bombs. That has also happened since the last time we spoke. Adrian Wojnarowski, who we all lovingly refer to as Woj, is now gone. He's gotten out of the breaking news game. Big opportunity. Shams, many believe, could end up being the guy to go replace him at ESPN. He currently works for The Athletic. I don't know what the terms of his agreement are. A lot of people think that Shams is going to end up at ESPN. We'll see if that happens. But Shams breaks the news on a Friday morning. What time was that at? It was like 8. Right about 8 o'clock. Joel Embiid says he is signing a contract extension with the Philadelphia 76ers. The one-time NBA MVP will sign a 3-year, $193 million maximum extension with the Sixers with a player option in the 2028-2029 season. Right? Sources tell The Athletic. Let's break this down for a second. Now, if you are worried about what this could mean for the Sixers down the line, you are well within your right. Okay? We need to have, I hate doing the Kevin Kincaid methodology of, well, two things can be true. It could just be a real nothing burger. You have to have a moment where you have to kind of divorce two ideas, okay? Things aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. Like, we can have a moment here where we say, oh my gosh, I need this watch to stop listening to me. It's freaking me out. We have to have a moment here, if you're a Sixers fan. Could there be real concern about Joel Embiid's ability to stay, to remain healthy at any point between now and the end of this deal, which could possibly go as long as the end of 2029? Yeah, you should be worried. You should be concerned. Of course you should. The man has had a myriad injuries, right? Tons of them. All over the place. Orbital bones, navicular bone, his back, other parts of his face, gastroenteritis that just pops up in big moments. There have been a lot of injuries. Sure. Do I think that, you had much of a choice if you're the Sixers? Well, no, I don't think you do. You have a couple of things going on. If you're the Sixers, you have this guy who's won an MVP, who has probably played the best basketball that he will play. I don't see there being another level to Joel Embiid. Now, given what Paul George could be for this team, if he also remains healthy, and what Tyrese Maxey has shown himself to be, is there a scenario where the gravity that Paul George has, if he's able to pull guys out of the paint, because unlike Tobias Harris, Paul George is an actual threat from anywhere on the court, could that open things up for Embiid to be more dominant in the post? Sure. Do I think that Joel Embiid enjoys being in the post as much as we maybe want him to be? No. But in theory, is there another level he can go to? Is he going to score 35 a game? Is he going to score 38 a game? You would hope that just based on the team that they've put around him, he doesn't have to. You would hope that I don't know, is he going to become more of a menace on the boards? Is he going to become a more dominant interior defender, racking up more blocks? I don't see another level to Joel Embiid's game. But if you can have him at 85, 90% of what he was in his MVP season, and you can have that from now until the end of this contract, or from now until the end of let's say 2027, and then he regresses a little bit in the last couple of years, it'll be a lot of money. The cap will continue to go up. The percentage of the cap that his money will be responsible for will probably go down over time. It's a lot of money. It's more than $60 million a year. It's 64.3 million a year, I think, something like that. 6, 12, 18, fours. I think it's about right. 64 and a third million per year for those last 3 years. That's crazy. That's an insane amount of money. And yet at the same time, if you're the Sixers, what other choice did you have? He's the face of your franchise. You're in the midst of this kind of ugly battle for a new arena. You went 76th place, where the mayor came out and said that she approves it. I think I might actually bring up her quotes here in a minute, because a lot of people seem to think that just because the mayor said it's going to happen, or that there's an agreement, that arena is going to get built right now, right away, and that there's not going to be any further discussion about it. And there's going to be no further protests or whatever about it. We have to have an honest conversation there. But if you're the Sixers, what exactly was your other option? You couldn't potentially let him become a lame duck. You couldn't potentially get to a point where a couple years down the line, when his contract was set to expire, that you say, Joel, how about you come back for 20 million? No, he's the face of your franchise. He is the most recognizable Philadelphia 76er since Iverson. Some would argue that he is the most likable. It depends. most likable Sixer, since if you want to say Iverson, he certainly is well above and beyond the era of Sixers basketball where we had Andre Iguodala as the face of the franchise. He's serious, like he's legitimately better than anyone who was here, the prior decade ahead of Iverson. He's won an MVP. He hasn't gotten past the second round. There are legitimate concerns about whether or not you can build an entire team around a guy who plays this style, the traditional center, who also has the range to go out and hit threes from time to time. None of that has changed. But if you're the Sixers, like, you have to have that guy. He's going to, in theory, be a 76er for life. He will go on to be an ambassador for this team, the same way that Dr. J has been, the same way that Moses Malone sort of was, the way that, I don't know, you could maybe see Iverson continuing. Like, Iverson's affiliation with the team has been there. I don't know if I'd say he was like a massive ambassador for the team. He has a lot of other sponsorships and like other lifelong sponsorships that I kind of associate him with, maybe even a little bit more. Dr. J's probably the best comp. Does Embiid move into TV when his career is done, kind of like Charles Barkley, and kind of take that role where he's a Sixer for life and is kind of an ambassador of sorts in that role? Like, maybe it's possible. But if you're the Sixers, like, I don't see another option. Like, I don't see what else you could have done. And so if you're a Sixers fan, like, you should feel good about it. Have the fear around his injury. That will always be there. That will never go away. Unless he has like a legitimate career-ending injury, then you won't have the worry because you'll know it's done. Other than that, like, no, you should be concerned, and that's okay. But at the same time, be happy. Like, there is a scenario here. It was probably an unlikely one. But like, if you go back a year and a half, you would listen to podcasts from around the league. And I would listen to Bill Simmons on the Ringer Podcast Network, brought to you by something. And they would talk about the fact that Embiid maybe wants to force his way to the Knicks, that the Knicks would be a great landing spot for Joel Embiid. There had been potential, rumors going around about a year ago about a Julius Randle and additional assets for Joel Embiid if the Sixers ever wanted to get out from underneath. I have no idea if that was ever going to happen. I have no idea if Embiid ever really did have eyes for New York. What you should feel good about is if he's able to maintain his level of play, if he's able to be an MVP caliber player, you now have him locked in for the rest of his career, because I don't see him playing much beyond 2029. Maybe he will, maybe another year or two. Just based on his body, based on his age, we have to be realistic here. If you are trying to lure free agents longer term, maybe not this year, maybe the year after, if you're just looking at it from the perspective of trying to get guys to buy in on being a waiver wire pickup around the trade deadline, about being a veteran who's looking for a team to sign with next offseason, the year after, those guys who kind of hold out longer into the offseason, maybe don't get the deal they're looking for. You have Embiid under contract on a massive extension. You have Tyrese Maxey under contract on a massive extension. You have Paul George here on a massive contract with many years. Your big three are locked in. Whether it works or not remains to be seen. But if you're a Sixers fan, you at least don't have to have the constant nagging worry about what happens if one of these guys leaves. They're all here. Now, can players force their way out? Sure they can. But otherwise, it's a happy day if you're a Sixers fan. I'm going to go over to the comments because I'm sure there are people who are loving this extension and there are people who are wondering why the hell it happened in the first place. Let us go over to the comments section because we love the comments. You can join over on YouTube, X, Facebook, and like I said, Instagram Live. I'll also take your comments over there. And I see Alex Longer 10 over on Instagram Live was asking some questions. I'll get to those when we get to those topics. But let's see. Ford says, I still say the Sixers never win a title with Embiid. Like I said, there are people who are going to think that, who are going to say that. And he notes, let's pay hundreds of millions to a dude who gets injured every year and older. Got it. Connor Allen with a very astute point. He has to be on the team for the arena opening. I think that's entirely possible. There's this idea of, Andrew says, like the Lakers with LeBron. Ford says they signed a dude who is constantly hurt for hundreds of millions. Andrew Fawcett says paying for past performance is always a great idea. I sense a lot of sarcasm there. Let's see. There's a lot going on between those two. over in the comments. Christian says, very optimistic about the Sixers team. Finally have a well-rounded roster, big players locked in, and a competent coach. I think the coaching part of this is the other big thing. Like, there had been a little bit of fear when the Sixers got rid of Doc Rivers. Embiid seemed a little bit upset by it. Like, there had been kind of like not the rumors, but like some of the whispers around the team were that Embiid actually liked Doc and that getting rid of him, did they consult with him before they made that move? Nick Nurse comes in, solid enough year, looked like he was installing some like better systems overall. The Sixers, I think, were a more dangerous team last year. I think they're certainly going to be a much more dangerous team with Paul George. Second year of Nick Nurse knowing what he has to work with, I tend to agree. I'm optimistic. Do I think the Sixers are going to win the East? No. I think they're going to load manage a lot with Paul George and with Joel Embiid. I don't exactly expect to see these guys play 80 games. I don't expect them to even play 75. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw their big three play like 65 games or fewer together. I just think that that's going to be the way that they're going to manage the season. They know this all about the postseason. And that if you line these teams up head-to-head, healthy, the Sixers are better than every team in the Eastern Conference except for probably Boston from top to bottom. Now, if you want to shorten the rotation to 7 or 8 players, maybe there's a case to be made. There's another team that comes close. Could the Knicks? Like, if they can figure out what to do with Julius Randle and the Nova Knicks, is there a scenario where the Knicks are maybe as good as the Sixers on a shortened rotation? Maybe. Do you want to make the case about the Bucks? I wouldn't right now. Are the Bucks big two arguably as good as the Sixers? Sure. If Dame somehow comes back to the guy that he was in Portland, more so than what we saw out of him a lot in Milwaukee last year, then yes, like in theory, Milwaukee is still a threat. But that's it. Like, you're not going to convince me that Orlando is going to take 4 steps forward to be a real threat. You're not going to convince me that like Cleveland is a threat. You can't really convince me that Jimmy Butler's Miami Heat are a legitimate threat. So it really does come down to like those 4 teams at the top. It's Philly, it's Boston, it's New York, and maybe Milwaukee. But again, like if everything goes the way it's supposed to, and if Nick Nurse is the coach that you think he is, they should be able to get into the second round, hopefully past it, and then you likely play Boston in the Eastern Conference Final, and then you let the chips fall where they may. At some point, you have to exercise that demon, and you have to get to the NBA Finals. You continue to pay this money to Joel Embiid now. You've paid it to Max. You've paid it to Paul George. You got to build that team around them, and you have to figure it out. And these guys have to step up in big moments. We'll come back out. Nico says, love how this Sixers core is finally locked in for a couple of years. It's more than a couple of years. I mean, it's very many years. And he also says, next 3 years will be huge. I agree with that. Christian says, Tibbs is going to run the Knicks into the ground physically. Boston may have the hangover. Giannis may one out at some point. 2 to 4 seed is realistic for playoffs. I think that they probably finish with the 3rd seed. I wouldn't be surprised if you end up in a scenario where the Sixers are kind of playing the playoff seeding game, assuming Boston is the top seed, which good chance that they could be. The Sixers might try to jockey to avoid the Celtics for as long as they can. You get to that number 2, that number 3, you're in better shape. You don't want to be the 4th seed necessarily and have to get to Boston in a semifinal. That's not what you want. Get to the Eastern Conference Final, then figure it out. Josh White asks, how about TJ McConnell's Pacers? I don't believe they're real. I don't. I think they're an okay team. I think they're a perfectly acceptable playoff team in the Eastern Conference. I don't think that they're a threat of any kind. Somebody can bookmark this, and if like the Pacers go to the NBA Finals next year, come back to this, by all means, I will eat crow. I just don't see it. I think they're a fine team. Sometimes there's nothing wrong in the NBA with having a team that is a good playoff team. And I wouldn't even consider the Pacers a bubble playoff team. They're probably like a 5th or 6th seed, and that's okay. Nothing wrong with that. There's even a scenario where like Milwaukee falters a little bit. They fall to 5 and Indy like goes up to 4. And then you say, all right, like very nice season by the Pacers, but they don't have the top end talent that you need to be successful. Halliburton is a very good player. But outside of that, like there's not a lot on the Pacers that I look at and that I would fear if I were a coach of one of the more elite teams in the Eastern Conference. That's where I'm at on the Pacers. I think they're a perfectly fine team. I have nothing bad to say about the Pacers. Ford says they won't win the East. Will they get to the finals? So what is the point? I don't know what that means. If they make it to the finals, I like the Sixers' potential matchups coming out of the West. I still think that all things considered, if you end up taking on the Nuggets, I like Embiid against Jokic in a head-to-head matchup. Historically, Embiid has done well against Jokic. I think it's a perfectly fine matchup. I don't see the Warriors having some kind of a resurgence. I don't see them having a massive turnaround. Dallas is a really good team. Dallas could be a tough matchup. There's some teams out west that like maybe scare you a bit. But oddly enough, like I think that the Sixers match up with a lot of those Western Conference teams better than they match up with Boston. So it really is like if you could just get past, or if you can get like Miami to pull off an upset in the first round or whatever against Boston and clear the way. I like the Sixers against any other team in the conference, and I'd like them against a lot of the teams that could come out of the West. Anyway, it's a good day. It's a big day if you're a Sixers fan. Joel Embiid signs an extension, could potentially be here through the 2028-29 season.